If you want charity, girl, you should earn it. Come up here. Let everyone see what failure looks like. Asterisk asterisk. What happens when a billionaire's attempt to humiliate a beggar child backfires into the most devastating exposure of his life? When 11-year-old Beatrice, a homeless girl with nothing but a worn notebook and buried truth, is dragged onto a stage meant to mock her, no one expects the spectacle to become a courtroom. This is the story of how one voice, just one quiet declaration of truth, can dismantle an empire built on blood and silence in front of Chicago's most powerful elite. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me deliver even better stories in future videos. If you're watching for the first time, like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon now so you never miss the notifications of my daily published stories. Thank you. And let's dive into the full story. The late autumn rain fell on downtown Chicago like judgment, but Beatrice Harper barely felt it anymore. Her 11-year-old frame sat huddled on the marble steps of the Imperial Opera House, the oversized gray sweater doing little against the November cold. The weathered notebook clutched in her hands contained more than a child's scribbles. It held names, dates, and truths that powerful men had paid fortunes to bury. Silent night, holy night, she hummed softly, the melody drifting from behind the opera house's towering glass doors where an orchestra rehearsed. Though Christmas was still weeks away, the melody connected her to a memory, her mother's voice, teaching her the notes on an old upright piano before everything burned away. Beatrice had been sitting on these steps for 6 weeks, earning nothing, asking for nothing, just waiting, watching. The corner of Michigan Avenue and East Congress had become her observation post, a square of cardboard beneath her, her only barrier against the wet stone. She'd learned the patterns, when the loading dock opened, when security changed shifts, when Charles Layton himself arrived for board meetings. The ornate doors of the opera house burst open, and Charles Layton emerged, flanked by his assistant Victoria Chun and 2 security guards in sharp suits. At 62, Layton commanded attention. Silver hair immaculately styled, navy tuxedo that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, and an expression of calculated benevolence that had made him a fixture in Chicago's philanthropic circles. Mr. Layton, the gala guests are arriving, Victoria said softly, tablet in hand, but Charles had stopped. His eyes had found the small figure on his steps. Beatrice didn't flinch, didn't look away. She'd been invisible for 6 weeks. Tonight, she needed to be seen. Well, Charles's voice carried across the entrance plaza, causing arriving guests in evening wear to pause. What do we have here? Still warming my doorstep, are you? The small crowd of arriving donors stopped, sensing drama unfolding. Several pulled out phones. A news crew setting up for gala coverage turned their camera. Beatrice stood slowly, notebook pressed against her chest, meeting the gaze of the billionaire. She'd seen his face everywhere, magazines praising his transformative urban renewal, news features on his second chance workforce programs, charity rankings listing his foundation's millions in donations. She'd also seen his face in her nightmares. I'm not here for warmth, Mr. Layton, Beatrice said quietly, but her voice carried in the evening air. I'm here because this building sits where truth used to be. Charles laughed, a sound designed for his growing audience. Truth? Philosophy from a street child? How refreshing. He stepped closer, his expensive shoes clicking on marble. Tell me, girl, how much do you make sitting here? $5? 10 on a good day? I don't sit here for money, Beatrice answered, her chin lifting slightly despite her racing heart. I sit here for memory. Memory? Charles gestured broadly to his guests. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a poet. He pulled out his wallet, extracting a crisp $100 bill, holding it up so the cameras could see. You want this? You want real charity instead of whatever delusion you're nursing. Beatrice's eyes didn't waver from his face, though her hands trembled slightly around her notebook. Here's my offer, Charles announced loudly, playing to his audience of arriving donors, cameras, and curious onlookers. Tonight is my legacy gala. 400 of Chicago's finest are about to witness my foundation's presentation on urban renewal. You come inside, really come inside, not just sit on my steps, and tell everyone what you think I owe you. His smile was cruel. If you can prove you deserve anything from me, I'll write a check right there on stage. But when you fail, and you will fail, you leave these steps forever. Deal, the crowd murmured. Some looked uncomfortable. Others leaned in, entertained. Victoria touched Charles's arm. Sir, perhaps. Let her speak, Charles interrupted. Let everyone see what entitlement looks like in its purest form. He gestured toward the doors. Well, girl, do you have the courage? Or are you only brave when you're invisible? Beatrice looked at the open doors, then at her notebook, then back at Charles Layton. Inside that building, in a basement archive she'd once seen as a child holding her mother's hand, were blueprints. Evidence. Truth. She'd waited 6 weeks for him to invite her inside. I'll come, Beatrice said simply. But I don't want your money, Mr. Layton. I want you to remember what you've forgotten. Remember? Charles laughed again, but something flickered in his eyes. What could you possibly teach me? Beatrice took her first step toward the entrance. How many people died to build your empire? Starting with my mother. The crowd's murmur changed pitch. Charles's smile froze for just a fraction of a second before returning, wider and more false than before. Well then, he said, gesturing grandly toward the golden doors. Let's give the people a show they'll never forget. As Beatrice walked past him into the marble foyer, she didn't see Charles exchange a quick, sharp look with Victoria. She didn't notice the security guards receiving subtle hand signals. But Carlos Mendez noticed. From his position at the stage technician's entrance, the quiet man in his early 40s watched the small girl enter the building, watched the billionaire follow her with predatory confidence, and made a decision he'd been delaying for 15 years. Tonight, the truth would have its stage, and mercy would be the last thing anyone begged for. Beatrice Harper had learned to be invisible long before she sat on these steps. At 11 years old, with intelligent eyes that saw too much and remembered everything, she'd mastered the art of existing in spaces without disturbing them. Her oversized gray sweater, worn but meticulously clean, washed in shelter sinks when she could, hung past her knees. Her hair, despite 6 weeks of street life, remained in neat braids she redid each morning with careful fingers. The weathered notebook she carried everywhere contained more than a homeless child's observations. Pages filled with dates, times, patterns, sketches of building layouts, names written in careful script, each one a person the world had decided to forget. For 42 days, Beatrice had maintained her vigil outside the Imperial Opera House. She never panhandled, never approached the well-dressed guests streaming through the golden doors. Other street people, the veterans at the corner, the elderly woman who collected cans, called her the quiet one. Sometimes they shared what little they had. Last Tuesday, Beatrice had given half her shelter meal to old Marcus, whose bad hip meant he couldn't make the walk to the soup kitchen. At night, when the opera house rehearsals ran late, she'd hum along with the melodies seeping through the walls. Her mother had taught her to hear music in everything. The rhythm of rain, the harmony of traffic, the melody hidden in human voices. Now, standing in the marble foyer with cameras pointed at her and Chicago's elite watching, Beatrice felt the weight of her choice. The security guard who'd escorted her inside waited by the entrance, hand near his radio. Charles Layton stood 10 feet ahead, confidence radiating from his tailored tuxedo, already turning to lead her deeper into his domain. But Beatrice's eyes had caught on something else, the ornate molding along the ceiling, the specific curve of the grand staircase. She'd seen these details before, traced by her mother's finger on blueprints spread across their kitchen table. Asterisk, see this, baby? This is where beautiful buildings hide their secrets. In the spaces between what people see and what architects know is there. Asterisk. From the shadows near the stage entrance, a man in technician's blacks watched the scene unfold. Carlos Mendez, early 40s with salt and pepper hair and observant eyes that missed nothing, stood perfectly still. He'd been waiting for this moment without knowing exactly when it would come. When Beatrice's gaze swept the foyer, and landed briefly on the architectural details. Recognition flickered across his weathered face. She knew. Somehow this child knew. Beatrice straightened her shoulders, brushed imaginary dust from her sweater with dignity that transcended her circumstances, and gripped her notebook, her only possession, her only weapon, tighter against her chest. She'd waited 6 weeks for this door to open. Now she'd see if the truth was still inside. The Imperial Opera House ballroom was a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across 400 guests in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos, clothing worth more than Beatrice had seen in her entire life. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the security guard escorted her down the center aisle, a small figure in gray moving through a sea of silk and diamonds. Beatrice didn't lower her eyes. She walked with her head up, notebook pressed to her chest, meeting the stares of women dripping in jewels and men whose watches could feed families for months. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others leaned in, curious about the disruption to their evening's entertainment. Charles Layton stood center stage, microphone in hand, mid-speech. And that's why the Layton Foundation remains committed to lifting people from poverty, to giving those less fortunate the tools they need to. He paused, spotting Beatrice's entrance, and his smile widened with practiced spontaneity. Speak of the devil. Or should I say, speak of the deserving poor. Nervous laughter scattered through the audience. Some clapped uncertainly. Others shifted in their seats, sensing something off-script unfolding. Come, come. Charles beckoned Beatrice toward the stage with theatrical generosity. Ladies and gentlemen, this young lady has been decorating my front steps for weeks now. I thought, what better way to demonstrate our commitment to outreach than to bring her inside? Beatrice climbed the stage steps, each one feeling like a decision she couldn't unmake. Charles circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey, his movements designed for the cameras positioned throughout the ballroom. Tell us, child, he said, voice booming with false kindness. What makes you think you deserve charity? What makes you believe the world owes you something? The audience leaned forward. This was the moment they expected, the grateful tears, the stammered thanks, the validation of their own generosity by proxy. Instead, Beatrice looked directly into Charles Layton's eyes and said clearly, I don't want charity, Mr. Layton. I want what you owe. The ballroom went silent. 400 guests collectively held their breath. Charles's smile froze, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. What I owe? He laughed, but the sound had edges now. You think the world owes you something? That success comes from taking rather than earning. He turned to his audience, playing to them. Fine. You want to earn something? Let's make this interesting. He pointed to the Steinway grand piano position stage left. Play that piano. Play something beautiful, truly beautiful, and I'll write you a check for $10,000 right here, right now. His voice dropped to mock seriousness. But when you fail, and we both know you will, you never come near any of my properties again. Deal. The trap was perfect. The cameras were rolling, streaming live to his foundation's donor network. This would be his proof that poverty reflected inability, that charity was wasted on those unwilling to meet basic standards of culture and skill. Beatrice walked to the piano, her worn sneakers soundless on the polished stage floor. Her small hands hovered above the ivory keys, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from memory so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her. From the wings, Carlos Mendez watched, his hand moving to rest on a control panel he'd prepared weeks ago, waiting for a moment exactly like this. Beatrice's whisper was barely audible, meant only for herself and the ghost of the woman who taught her. This was my mother's song. Her fingers descended to the keys. The first notes silenced the room like a held breath. Beatrice's fingers moved across the keys with devastating precision, not the fumbling of an amateur, but the haunting skill of someone taught by a master. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor flowed from the Steinway, each phrase emotionally surgical, cutting through the ballroom's opulence with beauty so raw it felt like witnessing something private. The nervous laughter died instantly. Guests who'd been smirking moments before sat frozen, champagne glasses forgotten halfway to lips. Charles's confident smile faltered, confusion replacing certainty as this homeless child produced music that belonged in concert halls. Some guests wiped their eyes. Others leaned forward, transfixed. A society matron in diamonds pressed her hand to her chest. These were people who attended symphonies, who prided themselves on cultural sophistication, and they recognized mastery when they heard it. "Where did she?" someone whispered. "That's conservatory level," another murmured. Then, midway through the piece, Beatrice transitioned. The classical composition melted into something else, a melody simpler but somehow more profound. A folk song, haunting and mournful, that some of the older guests recognized with sudden sharp inhales. In the wings, Carlos Mendez straightened, his weathered face going pale. "The Riverside Lament," he whispered. His hands moved quickly across the control panel, accessing files he'd hidden in the venue's media system years ago, waiting for this exact moment, waiting for someone who had the right to bring them into the light. Charles shifted uncomfortably on stage. "All right, enough?" he began, reaching toward Beatrice. "Show." Multiple audience members turned on him, actually shushing the billionaire host in his own ballroom. His control of the room evaporated like morning fog. The melody continued, each note a remembrance. Those who knew Chicago's darker history recognized it. The song played at memorial services 15 years ago, after the Riverside warehouse fire that killed 23 people. Charles Layton's first major redevelopment project, the tragedy that somehow ended with him owning prime real estate and insurance settlements that launched his empire. Beatrice played the final chord, letting it hang in the crystal chandelier air until it faded to nothing. Then she turned on the piano bench, looking directly at Charles Layton with eyes far too old for her young face. "My mother taught me that song, Mr. Layton," she said into the absolute silence. Her voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. "She played it the night before she died. At Riverside Warehouse, where she worked in your factory." The silence was so complete you could hear champagne bubbles bursting in forgotten glasses. Charles's face drained of color, his tint suddenly looking like poorly applied makeup over pale shock. In the wings, Carlos's finger hovered over the enter key. The truth was about to have its stage. Beatrice stood from the piano bench, facing Charles Layton with unwavering composure. "You said if I played well, you'd give me what I deserved," she said, her young voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I deserve the truth about how my mother died." The audience's confusion rippled into sharp interest. Phones appeared in hands. Journalists in the crowd leaned forward, instincts activated. Charles recovered quickly, his politician's smile snapping back into place. He turned to his audience, hands spread in reasonable appeal. Riverside was a tragedy, yes. A terrible electrical fire, thoroughly investigated by city officials. His voice carried practiced sympathy. "We rebuilt that neighborhood into the thriving commercial district you see today, created hundreds of jobs." His voice trailed off as the massive screens behind him flickered to life. Documents filled the displays, official letterhead, inspection reports, internal memos. Carlos's fingers moved across the control panel in the wings, years of archived evidence flowing onto screens visible to every guest, every camera, every live stream viewer. The fire marshal's preliminary report appeared first, stamped confidential, not for public release. Safety violations cited 3 weeks before the fire: faulty electrical wiring in the East Wing, overloaded circuits, inadequate fire suppression systems. Then came the memos, Charles's signature clearly visible at the bottom of each. Delay safety upgrades until after Q4 earnings report. Electrical repairs non-critical, postponed to next fiscal year. Night shift facility lockdown protocols remain in effect to prevent inventory theft. The inspection records scrolled past in damning detail. Emergency exits chained shut, fire suppression system disabled to cut maintenance costs. Workers locked inside the building during overnight shifts per company policy. The ballroom erupted. Journalists typed frantically on phones and tablets. Camera operators zoomed in on the screens, then swung to capture Charles's face. Guests stood, some moving toward exits, others pulling out their own phones to record. Turn those off. Charles shouted at his staff. Turn them off now. Victoria Chin appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand, her face ashen. Sir, she said quietly, urgently. Sir, this is streaming live. 50,000 viewers and climbing. Beatrice's voice rose above the chaos, clear and devastating in its calmness. My mother was Maya Thompson, third shift supervisor at Riverside Warehouse. Every eye turned to her, this small girl in an oversized sweater who suddenly commanded the room. She called me that night at 11:47 p.m., said she smelled smoke, said the doors wouldn't open. Beatrice's voice didn't waver, didn't break. She delivered each word with the precision of someone who'd lived this moment 1,000 times. I heard her screaming before the line went dead. I was 6 years old. The room turned on Charles like a living thing. Donors who'd been applauding him moments before exchanged horrified looks. Board members physically shifted away, creating visible distance. Senator Morrison stood, face red with fury. Others recorded on phones, ensuring this moment would outlive the evening. Charles backed toward the edge of the stage, hands raised defensively. This is slander. Lies fabricated by. I'll sue everyone in this. Carlos Mendez's voice cut through the speakers, calm and implacable. Then explain the audio log, Mr. Layton. The audio crackled through the ballroom speakers, a phone call from 15 years ago, preserved in evidence logs that were supposed to have been destroyed. A younger Charles Layton's voice, unmistakable despite the passage of time. How many inside? 23? Christ. A pause, then colder, calculated. Look, the insurance is maxed out. The building's worth more destroyed than operational. You understand what I'm saying. Another voice, hesitant, horrified. But sir, they're still. Charles cut him off. By the time the fire department gets through downtown traffic, it'll be over. Sometimes God does our cost cutting for us. The collective gasp was like all the air being sucked from the room. Then chaos erupted. Guests surged to their feet, some shouting, others standing in stunned silence. Monster, a woman screamed. Murderer, a man bellowed. Senator Morrison ripped up his foundation check and threw it toward the stage. Others followed, paper fluttering through the air like damning snow. Charles's composure shattered completely. That recording is inadmissible. Illegally obtained. His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. He spun toward the wings, pointing at Carlos with a shaking hand. Who the hell are you? Carlos Mendez stepped from the shadows into the stage lights, his quiet presence suddenly commanding. Carlos Mendez. Chicago Municipal Archives, 2008 to 2015. His voice carried the weight of 15 years of waiting. I was ordered to destroy these files when you bought the building that housed them. He paused, letting that sink in. I kept copies. Waited for the right time. Waited for someone who had the moral authority to bring them forward. His eyes moved to Beatrice, and something like absolution passed between them. Security. Escort this man out. Charles shouted, but the guards stood frozen, unwilling to touch a scandal that was already destroying everything. Beatrice walked to center stage, stopping directly in front of Charles Layton. At 11 years old, she barely reached his chest, but in this moment, she towered over him. 23 people, she said, her voice steady as stone. My mother and 22 others. For insurance money. She tilted her head, studying him like he'd studied her earlier, but with genuine curiosity rather than cruelty. Was it worth it, Mr. Layton? Charles backed away, his expensive shoes stumbling on the polished stage floor. He bumped into the Steinway Grand, hands gripping the piano's edge to steady himself. His fingers trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the ballroom's climate control. The man who'd controlled this room, controlled this city, for decades was now trapped on his own stage, with nowhere left to run and no words left to spin. Thomas Sterling rose from his seat in the front row, his 70-year-old frame rigid with fury. As chairman of the Layton Foundation Board, his word carried weight that even Charles couldn't ignore. Charles, effective immediately, you are removed as CEO and stripped of all board authority. Security, escort him from the premises. Around the ballroom, other board members nodded, fingers flying across phone screens, signing emergency motions, activating crisis protocols. The legal liability was too massive, too public to defend. Tom, you can't, Charles began. We can, and we have. Sterling cut him off coldly. Our attorneys are already filing separation documents. A journalist near the stage checked her tablet. We're at 500,000 live viewers, she announced to her camera crew. Trending #1 nationally. #Riverside Fire Truth. News anchors in attendance abandoned their prepared gala coverage, broadcasting breaking news instead. This is unprecedented. Chicago billionaire Charles Layton implicated in deadly warehouse fire cover-up from 15 years ago. The ballroom split. Half the guests rushed for exits, distancing themselves from the catastrophe. The other half remained, forming a human wall, ensuring Charles couldn't slip away. Senator Morrison's voice boomed. I'll be introducing emergency legislation by Monday. Criminal penalties for corporate negligence resulting in death. Philanthropic committee heads surrounded Sterling, demanding the immediate return of donated funds. Every cent, one insisted. Our organizations cannot be associated with blood money. Victoria Chun approached Charles, and for a moment hope flickered in his eyes. Finally, someone on his side. Then she extended papers. My resignation, she said quietly. And a subpoena. I've been talking to federal prosecutors for 6 months, Charles. Her voice cracked. I couldn't live with it anymore. I'm sorry it took me this long. Someone held up their phone, showing Layton Industries' stock price in freefall, trading halted by emergency circuit breakers. Banks were calling emergency meetings. Properties were being seized. The Layton Foundation dissolved by unanimous board vote, its assets frozen pending investigation. Sirens wailed outside, growing closer. Detective Williams entered with 4 uniformed officers, badge held high. Charles Layton, we have extensive questions about the Riverside warehouse fire of 2010. Not an arrest. Not yet. But the trajectory was unmistakable. Charles spun toward the remaining audience, desperation naked on his face. You don't understand the pressure. The competition. The margins in that industry. But no one was listening. Guests turned away, literally showing him their backs. He turned to Beatrice, the only person still looking at him. What do you want? Money? I'll give you millions. 10 million. 20. Name your price. Beatrice's expression didn't change. I don't want your money. Then what? Charles's voice broke. What do you want from me? I want you to say their names. Charles stared at her, confusion replacing desperation. What? Say their names, Beatrice repeated, pulling her weathered notebook from her sweater. All 23, starting with my mother. Beatrice opened her notebook to a page worn soft from repeated reading. The names were written in careful script, some in her childish hand from years ago, others added as she'd learned more. Maya Thompson, age 34. Jamal Washington, age 29. Rosa Martinez, age 41. David Chun, age 52. Her voice was steady, each name a small act of resurrection. She looked up at Charles, holding the notebook toward him. You erased them to build your empire. Now you'll remember them. She extended the notebook closer. Read their names. Out loud. To everyone. I won't. This is absurd. Charles stammered, looking wildly around for support that no longer existed. Detective Williams stepped closer, his voice professionally neutral. Mr. Layton, cooperating might help your situation considerably. Charles scanned the room desperately. Every exit blocked by police, media, or witnesses determined to see this through. There was nowhere left to run. Carlos's fingers moved across the control panel one final time. The screens changed, filling with photographs. 23 faces, smiling in family portraits, posing with children, wearing ID badges for their first day at Riverside Warehouse. Real people with real lives, not statistics buried in insurance reports. Maya Thompson's photo appeared center screen. She had Beatrice's same intelligent eyes, the same dignified bearing. She was laughing in the picture, arm around a 6-year-old Beatrice at what looked like a birthday party. Something inside Charles Layton broke. His knees buckled, not metaphorically, not dramatically, but completely. He collapsed to the stage floor, 15 years of justification and rationalization crumbling like the warehouse he'd let burn. I didn't mean it wasn't supposed to. The words came out choked, incoherent. For the first time, genuine emotion replaced calculation. Horror at himself, at what he'd become, at what he'd done. Beatrice stood over him, 11 years old but ancient in her sorrow and strength. "You wanted me to beg for charity," she said quietly. "Instead, you'll beg for forgiveness you'll never receive." She placed the notebook on the stage floor in front of him. "Read." Charles's shaking hands picked up the notebook. His voice broke on the first name. Maya Thompson, age 34, mother of Beatrice. Tears streamed down his face, 20 years of emotional armor dissolving. He got through 5 names before sobbing overtook him. "Keep reading," Beatrice said. "Not cruel, just immovable." Charles continued, voice cracking on every name. Jamal Washington, age 29, engaged to be married. Rosa Martinez, age 41, mother of 3. The cameras captured everything. No spin, no PR team, no escape. Just a man finally facing what he'd done, speaking the names of people he'd treated as acceptable losses. Some in the audience wept. Others filmed, ensuring this moment would live forever in digital memory. None intervened. They were witnessing something rare and terrible, justice delivered not through violence, but through truth spoken aloud. Charles read all 23 names, his voice growing hoarser, his body shaking. Beatrice stood tall throughout, a small figure casting a long shadow under the stage lights. In the wings, Carlos Mendez watched, his mission finally complete after 15 years. Detective Williams waited patiently, handcuffs ready, letting Charles finish what he should have done 15 years ago, acknowledging the dead. Charles Layton was arrested that night on charges of criminally negligent homicide, evidence tampering, and insurance fraud. Bail was denied. Too much wealth, too much motive to flee. His empire was liquidated, assets seized to fund victim compensation. The trial was set for 3 months later, though the verdict had already been delivered on that stage. In the weeks that followed, transformation came in unexpected forms. A scholarship was established in Maya Thompson's name, funding conservatory education for children from underserved communities. Beatrice was accepted to the Chicago Conservatory with full support, housing, instruction, everything her mother had once dreamed for her. A repentant board member donated an apartment. Beatrice's notebook was preserved in the Chicago History Museum, a testament to memory against erasure. Carlos Mendez was reinstated to the municipal archives with commendation, becoming a fierce advocate for government transparency. He worked alongside Beatrice on the Riverside Memorial Project, ensuring the 23 victims would never be forgotten. The stage where humiliation had been attempted became a site of remembrance. An annual concert honored the victims, with Beatrice performing her mother's song each year. The melody spread, played in schools, churches, community centers. The Riverside Lament became a hymn of accountability. The Riverside neighborhood was rebuilt, but this time by community, not corporations. Strict labor safety laws passed through the legislature, Maya's Law, mandating transparent inspections and criminal penalties for negligence. Charles Layton's name was sandblasted from every building he'd claimed, replaced with the names of those he'd erased. 1 year later, Beatrice stood on that same stage, now 12 years old, fingers poised above the same Steinway grand. The ballroom was full again, not with donors seeking tax write-offs, but with survivors' families, supporters, journalists documenting what remembrance looks like. Carlos managed sound from his familiar position in the wings, no longer hiding evidence, but amplifying truth. Beatrice played her mother's song, each note a small defiance against forgetting. When the final chord faded, she stood and addressed the audience. "My mother used to say music remembers what people forget," Beatrice said, her voice strong and clear. "This stage tried to erase us. Now it speaks our names forever." The applause that followed wasn't for entertainment, but for truth finally given its voice. The camera panned to an empty seat in the front row, Maya Thompson's photograph resting on the cushion, her intelligent eyes watching her daughter stand tall. The stage remembers. Thank you so much for staying with Beatrice's story until the very end. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about justice, memory, and the power of truth, I would be deeply grateful if you'd rate it out of 10 in the comments below. Your feedback helps me understand what resonates with you and guides me in crafting even more meaningful stories. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon so you never miss a new story. I publish fresh, original narratives daily, stories about courage, redemption, justice, and the extraordinary strength found in ordinary people. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for being part of this community. Your support means everything and allows me to continue bringing these powerful stories to life. Remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't violence or wealth. It's the simple, persistent act of remembering, of speaking names when the world wants silence, of standing tall when others expect you to bow. Share this story if you know someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep the conversation going about accountability, truth, and the voices that refuse to be silenced. Until the next story, take care, stay inspired, and never underestimate the power of one person who refuses to forget. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's continue this journey together.